Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca and I'm a PhD student at the Institute of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in Lisbon in Portugal. Today I will be presenting my research on the global human-mediated introduction of vector mosquitoes. Let's take a look at how mosquitoes are conquering the world. Mosquitoes are the most deadly creatures on Earth, causing over 700,000 deaths per year through the transmission of pathogens of human diseases. Most female mosquitoes need to take a blood meal to produce eggs. When they bite an infected host, they ingest the pathogens, which then multiply in them and can be transmitted to other hosts. That's important to know because the occurrence of vector-borne diseases depend on the presence of certain species. Species introductions have occurred throughout history, but intercontinental introductions began with the shipping in the 15th century. This process has accelerated in recent decades due to globalization and increased trade. Mosquitoes are small and adaptable, can be introduced unintentionally in various ways, as adults, eggs, or larvae in transported goods or objects that collect water. Introducing mosquitoes into new regions can impact disease transmission, either because a new disease can emerge or because transmission cycles of existing diseases can be altered. One example of a mosquito-transmitted disease is dengue. In the past 20 years, dengue cases have increased 8-fold, with most cases in tropical and subtropical regions. But non-native mosquitoes and a warmer climate are driving this disease transmission also in temperate regions. Since 2010, Europe has recorded increasing numbers of locally acquired dengue cases. And this is only possible because a mosquito that is able to transmit dengue was introduced to Europe for the first time in 1979. To track vector-borne diseases, we need to understand the spread of their vectors. I have therefore compiled a database from available literature on the first introductions of non-native mosquito species known to transmit diseases to humans, based on country borders and regional subdivisions. That means I have systematically searched on Google Scholar for scientific publications using all combinations of region names and mosquito names and the terms introduction or invasion or first record. In the end, in my database, each entry includes the year of first record, the non-native species name, the name of the new region, the mode of introduction, and if the species was just introduced or also able to establish. There are more than 3,700 mosquito species in the world, but I focused only on the 186 mosquito species that are confirmed vectors of human diseases. Of these, 45 species have been introduced into new regions, 28 of which have successfully established themselves. My database includes 696 first introductions of non-native mosquito vectors into new regions. We used the database to analyze the spatiotemporal patterns of species introduction and establishment. First, we analyzed the temporal trends in the introduction of non-native species. Then, we analyzed the introduction pathways and establishment success. And next, we assessed the range similarities of non-native species using a principal component analysis, in other words, PCA, which included the number of introduced regions, the number of continents, the latitudinal range between introduced regions, and the average distance between introduced regions. We then identified cold and hot spots in species introductions using regression models, taking into account the variables country size, sampling effort, and continent. And finally, we assessed the drivers of geographic patterns of introduction and establishment, considering different environmental and socioeconomic variables. Our data reveals a significant increase in mosquito introductions and established species since the mid-20th century. Nearly half of all first records occurred after 1950. 28 of the 45 non-native species of vector mosquitoes were recorded for the first time after 1950, and of these, 13 were reported for the first time as non-native only after the year 2000. A few species were introduced to many regions, some even in a very short time, but most species were introduced to just 1 or 2 regions. To explore the patterns in the geographic ranges of non-native mosquito species, we performed the PCA and identified 4 groups of non-native mosquitoes. The first group are the global spreaders, like Aedes albopictus. The second group consists of species introduced to regions far apart, like Aedes nodoscriptus. The third group are species introduced to a few regions close to each other, like Anopheles stephensi. And the last and largest group are species only introduced to 1 or 2 regions. Interestingly, the timing of spreading doesn't significantly impact the number of new regions reached. And next, we wanted to take a look at how these species reach new areas. Most transport modes for mosquito introductions are unknown, but our records show a shift from ship-based transport to aircraft, ground transport, and unaided secondary natural dispersal. In the early days, mosquitoes were imported on ships and water containers during the slave trade. And in the middle of the 20th century, the introduction through imported tires and later through plants and other objects that collect water from mosquito eggs became more and more important. This increasing diversity of modes of introductions reflects the increase in trade and globalization, which also increases the possibilities of introductions and at the same time raises the difficulties of controlling introductions. And if we take a look at the establishment success of these introductions, we see that aircrafts have become increasingly important for mosquito introductions, but only a small proportion arriving through this pathway managed to establish. The role of shipping has decreased for species spreading since 1900, and fewer species establish after being transported by ship. This may be due to increased port and airport controls, the traits of the introduced species, in other words, possibly specialists rather than generalists, or the number of species arriving, meaning low propagule pressure. The large majority, however, arrives through unknown pathways, goes unnoticed, and has a high establishment success. Then we defined introduction cold and hotspots, independent of sampling effort, country size, and continent. The top 2.5%, which with more non-native mosquito introduction records than expected, are New Zealand, the Netherlands, United States, Mauritius, France, Palau, and Italy. The hotspots for established species follow a similar pattern, but some countries with high numbers of introductions, such as New Zealand, the Netherlands, and France, perform much better here. These countries either prevent the species well from becoming established, had eradication programs, or have strong controlling strategies. Or this might also be due to the species traits or the number of species arriving, as I said before. Conversely, Australia now ranks amongst the worst 2.5% because compared to other countries, more species establish here. Last, we tested several socioeconomic and environmental variables of each country to find drivers for the hotspots. We used percentage of agricultural land, percentage of wetland, if it was an island or not, precipitation, temperature, GDP, population, trade openness, number of colonial powers that had a long or short-term impact. And for mosquito introductions, only GDP per capita showed a significant positive effect. For the establishment of species, GDP per capita has a positive effect, and on the establishment of species that spread after 1900, the number of colonial powers that had a short-term impact on the countries shows a positive effect. To wrap it up, we've created an updated list of first mosquito introductions, including the year of first record, pathway, and establishment success. We provide evidence that rates of mosquito introductions have been rising in recent centuries, and particularly so in recent decades. We show that mosquitoes arrive through various pathways, but most of them by unknown routes, which helps them to go unnoticed and establish themselves in new regions. We identify hotspots for the introduction and establishment of species and point out areas that require more preventive measures. Our findings show that wealth, not environmental conditions, is the main driver for mosquito introduction and establishment. And last but not least, I would like to thank my supervisor, Cesar Capinha, and my co-supervisor, Carla Souza, for their contribution and support and guidance with this work. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. Thank you very much.